Okay, so today we're going to talk about my new Go Discover. This is the second Go Discover I've had. The first one I bought was just the sort of plug and fly version, which I put a Storm OSD in, and some of the videos that are previously on my YouTube channel, you can see those on there. This time I've bought just a fuselage section that comes in two parts so that I can install an APM into it. And it's easier to do in two halves because you can sort of get to all the nooks and crannies and bury things that normally you wouldn't be able to get to because of the fact that it's glued together. So I'm going to try and take the lid off here without knocking it over. Okay, so straight away you can see that there's an APM 2.6 in there. That's the power module for it, which goes to a power distribution board down the back, just because it's easier than soldering a hell of a load of wires together. I've got a set of wooden plinths in here and a battery sort of tray that I bought off a chap called Anton Smith, who's also on YouTube. He does some really good Go Discover videos, and once I saw that he was using these on his YouTube channel, I thought I've got to buy some, so I had some off him. This here is a Boscom 600 or a BOS 600, a 5.8 gig 32 channel video transmitter. Fantastic little piece of kit. That does get a bit warm, hence the PCB heat sinks that I put on it, but I've had that thing out to 5 kilometers with a normal cloverleaf antenna on it. Fantastic, it really is. And I have noticed since using the Boscom 200 milliwatt video transmitter that it does use a little bit more juice. I get less of a flight time, but having said that, I'd rather have a few minutes less flight time and have a more reliable video and telemetry feed. Okay, so moving on, here is the Minium OSD version 1.1. I'm running that and the radio unit, which I'll get onto in a second, on a separate 5-volt power supply. What I would find is if I ran it off the same power supply as the APM, if I keyed the throttle up or did something that was sort of quite electrically demanding, the picture would stutter or sort of flicker on the screen. So I read in a few forums somewhere that people are independentizing the 5-volt power supply to it, and I've got to say, faultless, not a problem whatsoever. Okay, so here we have the Ublox 6M GPS module that comes with the APM. Don't know if you can see just down here, at the end of my finger, I'm using a Skylark convert module that's in line with the GPS module. If you look at one of my previous videos on YouTube, you'll see that I've done a how-to video guide to enable the GPS module to interpret the GPS information that the Ublox puts out, whereas normally it can't. You've got to change the firmware in it, so that you don't have to run two GPS modules. Then you can just use everything off the same GPS module, which is really good, neat and compact, you know. Over this side you can see my pitot tube and the static and the dynamic tube that goes towards the actual airspeed sensor itself. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, if I'd have bought the plug and fly version from Hobbyking, there's no way that I'd be able to embed that into there, because it comes pre-glued, you see, so having it in two halves is just really handy for that sort of thing. Moving on to the standard speed control at the back. Everyone's sort of saying that they're changing these speed controllers, and I've got to say, this speed controller has done some serious mileage in my previous Go Discover faultlessly. All I've done is just added 2 extra heat sinks, very similar to the BOS 600, and kept it in the position where Hobbyking recommend to sort of keep it, and I've not had a problem with it, I've got to say, I must say. Moving on to the motor mount. Standard motor mount in these, shocking. Twice I broke or fractured a motor mount in my previous Go Discover, so this one I bought off the internet, Shapeways or somewhere like that, a 3D printing company on the internet. It's not an amazing fit, you have to do a little bit of fettling with it, but having said that, generally it's a lot stronger and more reliable than the standard motor mount. Moving on to the receiver, the 2.4 GHz receiver is FR Sky based. I am running it in is it S-Bus mode or CPPM mode. Basically all 8 channels come out of the one servo lead into the APM, and then the APM distributes accordingly. The reason that I've done that is it just enables me to use less wire. It's just less complicated. There's less stuff going on. It's just a lot neater way to do it. This little gizmo here is a channel changer. I have a downward facing permanently mounted camera, so I can have a look directly down at the ground that I'm flying over. Selectable, so generally speaking I'm looking out of this camera here, but that one doesn't face exactly down towards the ground. It's near enough, but if you want to fly over something and look at it, accurately, then really you need a second camera. Under this battery tray here, none of this is glued in yet. I wanted to do this video first before I sort of glued everything together and committed myself, otherwise, because you're never going to see these things again. It's a shame, really. So here is the 3DR telemetry module, which sort of just sits neatly in there. Here's my wiring loom from the pan and tilt servos for the front camera assembly, and that just sort of sits on neatly under there. I was originally going to have that on the outside of the aircraft, but the idea of me burying all these different bits and pieces actually into the foam was to try and keep everything sleek and aerodynamic as possible. There are a couple of protrusions from the outside of the aircraft underneath, but I'll explain those in just a second. So I ended up having to put this here. Originally I had it mounted this sort of way around, and then the aerial was tucked down into the polystyrene like that. Downside to that is that I found towards the other end of the garden I lost communication with it via Mission Planner on the laptop because the aerials weren't orientated correctly. This one was lying down inside the fuselage, whereas the one on the laptop was pointing directly uphill. So for the sake of an extra little hole in my battery tray, it just makes life a lot easier, and it's a lot neater, and it doesn't really get in the way. And it just pops back in there like that. Okay, so now we'll turn it over and we'll talk about the components underneath. Okay, so looking underneath the aircraft, it's just a standard fuselage. Here is half a ping pong ball that I've glued onto the outside of the aircraft that actually contains the cloverleaf antenna for the 5.8 GHz video transmitter. Over this side we can see the downward facing camera lens. It's just the lens that pokes out of there. It does have a cap that sits over it when not in use, but the reason why it doesn't stick through a lot is ideally to try and stop it from being damaged during a landing. That's why the ping pong ball was over the cloverleaf, again to try and protect the actual antenna lobes itself when it comes in for a landing. These things obviously only land on grass. I mean, if you landed it on tarmac or concrete or something, you're going to rip it to pieces, but a little bit of protection doesn't hurt. Over here is the antennas for the 2.4 gig FR Sky receiver. Using the 90-degree mount that you can buy off Hobbyking, for example, comes with rigid aerial tubes. What I've done is I've used only 5 or 6 mil of actual solid aerial tubes stuck out the base, and then put some nitro car fuel hose over the top of that and allowed the aerials to pass through it. So I'm still maintaining the 90-degree fashion that the aerials want to be orientated into. But again, on a landing, they're just simply going to brush backwards, not be bothered by the fact they're being bent backwards, and once you pick it up they just spring back to being 90 degrees again. And that's pretty much it for the underneath of the aircraft, really.